All right, so Alejandra, if you want to change the slide for me. All right, I am very excited this morning to kind of kick today off with kind of some keynote remarks by two of our state representatives, Representative Merleyn Bell and Representative Daniel Pay. Representative Bell was first elected in 2018 to represent House District 45 in East Norman. She is the first woman of color to not only represent her district, but the city of Norman. Representative Pay was first elected in 2018 as well to represent House District 62, which covers West and South Lawton. He is currently the youngest member of the Oklahoma House. Both Representative Bell and Representative Pay have firsthand knowledge of elections and the importance of getting out the vote. Both have shown their commitment to safe, secure, and accessible voting for Oklahomans. And they are here to energize us, to kind of kick off the day, give us some words of wisdom, whatever have you. Also to let you know that elected officials are here to be part of this process with you, and you should definitely connect with your local representatives when thinking about what activities and the information that you're giving to students. So please welcome them to the space, and I'm going to kick it over to Representative Bell first.
Thank you, Lauren, and good morning, everyone. Just want to make sure that you can see me and hear me okay. Yes, I'm getting a nod from Lauren, so good to go. Good morning again. I don't know if any of you are like me, but I've got my provisions here. I've got my coffee here, and this is very early in the morning for me. So I appreciate all of you coming out and being here with us. I appreciate the opportunity to be here myself. I'm really excited about this topic. Lauren knows that we talk about this a lot, and Oklahoma Votes has been incredibly helpful to us as legislators, to myself and Representative Pay, as we're putting together plans and trying to move forward legislation. So I wanted to start this morning by just telling you a little bit about myself, very briefly. Lauren already did a great job of outlining our bios, but just so you know, I went to the University of Oklahoma. I was a staff member at the University of Oklahoma for many, many years and still feel very, very connected to our campus. But as a legislator, I've also had the opportunity to go and visit other universities and colleges across the state and get to know them a little bit better. And that's been really exciting for me. As somebody who has spent a lot of time in Norman and been so Norman focused, it's also been really nice to get to know all of you and all of those campuses really well as well. And just to let you know, one of the reasons why I get so excited discussing this topic is because I know how, even though it's been a minute since I was a student, I know how challenging it can be to sort of be in that environment, and then also to stay engaged with everything that's going on off campus as well. And that level of engagement is something that's really necessary to, participate in the political process. And I know that that's really difficult, whether you're a student or a staff or faculty member, sort of merging those two worlds when you're so in it to win it, as they say, on campus can be difficult. So I really appreciate anyone's effort to be civically minded, especially because it wasn't something that I was always very good at. I know it takes work and it takes effort, and you all are here and putting forth that effort today. So, one of the things that we discussed beforehand as a goal of the keynote today is to talk about how you all can engage with us being legislators, and with the legislative process. And I, as a legislator, consider it my duty and also my pleasure to help to educate and empower constituents. Sometimes not even just my own constituents, but constituents from across the state, from different districts and different towns and cities. So, one way that we do that is through summits like this. But another way that we get to do that is by engaging with people when they come to visit us and helping, I think, first and foremost, which I wish I would have had, in years past when I was just starting to kind of dip my toe into politics, is, a guide for the political process and the policy process. That's one thing that I'm always happy to do, whether people come to visit or they just want to have a Zoom meeting in this new, post-corona time that we're living in. And having the opportunity to do that for people is something that always pays off in huge dividends for me and hopefully for them as well. The political process, while I don't think it's intentionally difficult to engage, it can certainly feel very daunting. And the policy process, the political environment can sometimes discourage that participation. So anytime that we get the opportunity to get together with folks and tell them, not only is this for and about you, which I think is the most important thing for us to be able to demystify for people, but it's also a place and a space where you're really needed. Because so often, if we're engaged in the legislative process, especially while session is ongoing in the spring of every year, it's very difficult for us to be able to hear things that aren't coming right at us all the time, or to engage in a way that's not sort of demanded from the people who are there to participate. The more we can hear from constituents, the more we can hear from people who want to engage in that political process, the better. I always say that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's something my dad always used to say. We need you there. We need you to be squeaky wheels. And we also, like I said, consider it a duty to be able to help empower you and educate you. So, for instance, legislators can be a great resource to you in terms of giving you contacts or connecting you to other people, whether that's agency and department heads, other legislators who might be like-minded, or I can say, well, I'm not working on that policy myself right now, but I know that Representative K is working on that, and I'd love to connect you with him. We can also be a great resource to you in terms of research. We have a wonderful research staff at the House that works for the House or works for the Senate. And oftentimes they're able to help us with projects. So if we decide we're going to work on something voting related, like the bill that Representative Pay was kind enough to sign on to this year that I ran, HB 3894, which was about on-campus voting. If we want to do some research about that, if you come to us with a legislative idea, we can certainly work with staff to help with that research. And I've offered that up to constituents this week, in fact, when we were working on a project, or they were working on a project, and I said, I can see this turning into legislation. Let me turn to research staff and get their assistance with that item. Because I think that there's a real opportunity here for us to kind of flesh out the need that you're talking about and get real hard data on that issue. And that's one way that we can help as legislators, even long before, it seems like long, but maybe it won't be that long until next session, to work on a bill. It's not just about writing the bill and getting it through committee and getting it on the floor. It's about doing all the research and making all of the connections ahead of time about that particular issue. So one other way that I wanted to mention, and I would love to sort of back and forth with you all about this and with Representative Pay, is a legislator's role in helping you to sort of refine an idea, refine a goal, and refine how we're going to approach that goal. And one way that we do that is by helping people to respond to the no's. So, for instance, with HB 3894, we were in a situation where the bill was great. We had on-campus support from people who really wanted to see it happen. and then hit a bit of a roadblock with county election officials who said, I don't understand the language in this bill. I'm not sure how this is going to work. I see that there could be, potential trouble up ahead. Being able to respond to those no's and figure out the ways to take somebody who I'm not thinking of the right word, but somebody who might be a detractor and turning them into a supporter, that's really critical. And if we've already hit those roadblocks, if we've already talked to people and found a solution to the problem that they've outlined, we can help you with that no, should you encounter the no. And I think that that's really critical. Being able to not only see all the reasons why whatever policy it is or whatever issue it is such a yes for you or for your co-conspirators is wonderful, but also being prepared for those no's is really important, because before a bill becomes law, especially, you'll get way more no's than you get yeses. And it's important to be ready for those. So those are just a few ways I think that legislators can help with whatever policy goals or whatever, issue related goals that you all have. I'm excited to be here and talk about even more ways we can collaborate together. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Representative Bell. And now we will kick it over to Representative Pay to give his remarks.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Hello, everyone. I've also got my morning wake-up call, and kudos to all of you for being young people and for being awake so early on a Saturday morning and talking about civic engagement and how to be involved in local and state politics. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Lawton and went to school at the University of Oklahoma, graduated 3 years ago now. And initially, I was actually a pre-med, a declared pre-med major. And I thought about wanting to go to medical school, like many freshmen do. And quickly, after I took a couple of math and science classes, I concluded it was not my forte. And when I took government and economics, those subjects really fascinated me. And so I decided to change majors to economics and political science, and got involved in the student government and had the honor of serving as a student body president for 1 year. And the Colorado Center also has a special place in my heart just because of the Capital Scholars Program, where I got to intern at the state capitol and also did a research fellowship through them. And so I think things like this voter engagement initiative are really awesome to see growing over the past several years. And after I graduated from OU, I decided to move back home to Lawton and start in local government. At that point in time, Parks and Recreation was on the air on NBC. And so I was really inspired to really start local, because I think local government is the truest form of government. It's the closest one to the people. And I was working in the city manager's office for a little bit. And then with the 2018 election cycle coming up, this House seat became an open seat. And I thought long and hard about, should I wait several years to get more experience under my belt, or is this the moment that I should take the plunge? And after a lot of consideration, I decided, we needed young people at the table to make decisions and to have our voices heard. And with everything going on in Oklahoma at the time, particularly education issues, I didn't want to just stand on the sidelines. I wanted to be a part of the arena and do my part to move the state in a better direction. So knocked on over 12,000 doors during that campaign cycle. And my election result is a great example of how every vote does count, because the final margin difference was about 42 votes. And so all those doors that were knocked, all the folks I spoke with directly, it made a difference in the end, and their decisions made a difference in the end. And so it's been 2 years. I can't believe it's been already that, and we're up for re-election now, coming up in November. And I think Representative Bell spoke very well about how the legislative process is a collaborative process. You can't just stand in your ideological corner and grandstand the entire time. You can't get anything done that way. You have to build bridges both across the aisle and across the rotunda with our colleagues in the Senate. And Representative Bell talked about sometimes the difficulties you have with stakeholders and finding compromise, which is very essential. And one example I'll give you all is the topic of speed limits. That's a very popular news item recently, and I proposed a bill back in the 2019 session to increase speed limits on the turnpike system from 75 miles per hour to 80 miles per hour, and on the rural highways from 70 miles per hour to 75 miles per hour. And initially had a very good dialogue with the folks at the Department of Transportation and the Turnpike Authority and Highway Patrol. And one of their specific requests was to have it be a gradual increase and also include a speed study to study the entire system and all the highways, figure out based on traffic history, the condition of the roads, where is it safe to begin increasing the speed limit, because they know this is something that's very popular among Oklahoma drivers and something that people want to see happen. So I was happy to work with them, and we were able to find that compromise, and the legislation did pass last year. And during the past several months, they've conducted that speed study, and the pandemic had some delay involved, but they finally got it done this summer, and they had a couple of board and commission meetings to begin approving speed limit increases across the state of Oklahoma. And I believe for the rural highways in some areas, they began changing the signs at 75 miles per hour. So very excited to see the progress that's been made, and really enjoyed working with all the different folks at those agencies in our government. And it could have been a different story had I, not been willing to compromise and stuck to my initial position. But I think when it comes to governing, it should be like riding a bike. You can't lean too far to the left or too far to the right. You have to be balanced at the end of the day. And now when it comes to what y'all can do on your part, I encourage you to check out, there's an organization called Generation Citizen, and it's for high school seniors, and it involves college students as well in terms of being volunteers to go into a high school classroom, a government classroom, and help the students identify a local or state issue that's very relevant and passionate to them. And over the course of a semester, do research on that policy topic and develop policy recommendations that you present at the end of the semester at the Capitol to all the relevant stakeholders. So it gives you an early taste about what it's like when it comes to the governing process and the legislative process. And I think it's really important that all of us do research and stay up to date when it comes to local and state issues. I know with all the national noise, it can be a tendency to focus just on what's happening in Washington, D.C., but the decisions that directly impact all of you happen at the state capitol and at your local city halls. And the turnout has been atrocious traditionally with those local elections. I think those should be a lot higher because there's so many really important decision makers that can be impacting your lives. And I guess the last point that I'll make before we open it for questions is, if you're interested in public service, don't be discouraged by the folks that say you're inexperienced, you don't have enough of life wisdom or whatever. Go for it. Even when you're still in college, find ways to get involved in your community. And I think Representative Bell and I, we really emphasize accessibility because that is a crucial part of being an effective legislator. And so we're happy if you need advice or any tips along the way, call or email us. I think Lauren has our contact information to distribute. And we're happy to sit down and talk with you. I've really enjoyed these types of sessions and getting to meet young folks and encouraging them to run for office and to get involved. And we have wonderful opportunities in terms of internships, as well as a PAGE program for high school students. So contact your local legislator and see what types of opportunities are available for you to learn more about state government, and then contact your city council members, your mayor, and find out about local government as well. Because at the end of the day, it's up to all of us to decide what type of government, what type of society we want to live in. So let's all do our part. Let's stay informed and engaged, and try to be good citizens in this country. So with that, Lauren, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Representative Pei and Representative Bell. I think that in the last 20 minutes, the nuggets of knowledge and wisdom and takeaway points that you both provided, I think are really key to engaging more young people, as well as kind of demystifying the process of how people can get involved. So there are a few things that I've seen in the chat. So one, and either of you can take this question, but Erica from OU put in the chat, what resources do you suggest for keeping up with local/statewide issues? Merleyn, I think you're still on mute.
Classic mistake. Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind for me is a few resources that really helped me when I was starting to become more politically engaged. The first one is the Oklahoma Policy Institute. This is a group out of Tulsa, an institute, kind of a think tank, basically, out of Tulsa, that does amazing research and amazing reporting on things that are happening statewide. So they have, and if you're like me, and you love a good graph, and you're a data nerd and love diving into the data, then they're a great resource for that. One of the things I really like about what the Policy Institute does, I'll just go on and on about the Policy Institute, is that they really focus on the budget and who gets what piece of our pie when it comes to our state resources, financial resources. And I think that that's really important. That's a really good place to start, sort of looking into how our resources are allocated. And I like to think of the budget as a living document, as a moral document that sort of dictates what our priorities are as a state. And when you start looking at it through that lens, then you see, oh, okay, so we're allocating this amount of money to this, but you know, what's happening with that and why has this number changed over time? It can be really useful. So the Policy Institute is great as a place to start. On the local level, I'd say, Norman especially, I'm sure some of you know that our local politics are very hot right now and usually always are. And so there are a lot of different resources. Of course, your city council members are great resources. If you follow them either online or on social media, you can watch meetings online and, get a feel for what's happening in local government that way. So, which all of this is great, of course, because of the pandemic, because if you don't want to get out and mask up and be in person, you can view all these things online. And social media is a great place to do that too. In Norman, we have individual ward pages. So once you figure out what ward you're in, you can go to that ward page and look at what people are saying and engage in that way with other people who live in your neighborhood, which is really helpful. So online resources for sure. I think if you're also willing to step out and get more involved, or you want to involve yourself with people who are already more involved, the Policy Institute also has a grassroots advocacy branch called Together Oklahoma. Together Oklahoma is an organization that helps to do that sort of education and take all of the information that the Policy Institute has released and help make it manageable and make action items from the data and the information, and gives people tools to empower them and educate them on how they can do exactly the kind of thing that we're doing, which is speak to legislators and advocate for policy. So,
Representative Pei, I know that I dropped your suggestion in the chat, but do you want to talk more about non-doc specifically or other resources?
Yes, and thank you, Lauren, for doing that. Non-doc is a great news organization, and they specifically report on local and state political affairs, and particularly during the legislative session, February through May. It's a great resource to keep track of when it comes to specific bills that are making their way through the process. And so I know folks are always looking for great news resources to look for. I highly recommend NonDoc for just that. And they got some great reporters who work really overtime most of the time to get the news out there to folks. So highly recommend all of you check out nondoc.com, and the link should be in the chat box as well.
Awesome, thank you. So one of the other questions, and you may not be the exact right people to answer this question, and I'm gonna kick this over whenever Misha comes from the State Election Board to talk about us next. But someone asked via text, where is it? The Oklahoma State Election Board, when will the Oklahoma State Election Board be required to comply with legislation passed 5 years ago to establish online voter registration? And I know that this is a big thing. This is something that I'm really hoping for personally, and I think will really help college students. So do you have any insight on that process?
I do. I actually was the House author on a piece of legislation with Senator Julia Kurt from the Oklahoma City area. She had been looking into this and was wondering the same thing about why it was taking so long with the State Election Board to create the online voter registration system. And I believe in the bill there was a set deadline by early next year to have the system in place. And with the session and with the pandemic, that was one of the bills that did not move forward. But in our dialogue with the State Election Board, they did say they were looking at calendar year 2021 to finalize the online system. And they said that, they were working on, number one, making sure that it was secure and safe for folks to get their information in. And with the technology, that's the main reason why they've been taking so long, since the original bill had passed years ago. So they just wanted to make sure that it was done in the right and safe way, ultimately. But it's in the works, and so hopefully by the time of the 2022 election cycle, that system will be in place.
Lauren, I'd just like to add that I think this question really highlights something that I was surprised to discover when I started getting involved, and especially as a legislator, realizing that passing a legislation or a piece of legislation, sending it over to the governor's office, having it signed, is often the first step in really implementing that policy or that statute. And that can be due to, again, the budget, financial limitations. It's one thing to say to a department, hey, we want you to do this, and quite another thing for them to be able to implement that successfully. And so thinking through all of those things ahead of time, because that's often going to be one of the no's that you get, right, is that's a great policy, but we don't have the money to implement it, or we don't have the people power to implement that. We'd have to hire so many more people, or technology really hasn't caught up to where you want to be. These kind of concerns, and being ready for those no's and being able to say, hey, I understand that there are limitations, but making this a priority and putting it on the books that we are prioritizing this as a state is just the first step to getting that really implemented. I mean, we've seen that with the election board. We've seen that with real ID issues. We've seen it with educational issues across the state, public ed issues, things like that. So, it's a marathon and not a sprint sometimes. And the legislation can be just the first part of that marathon. So.
Awesome. Okay, well, we've got like 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask one last question, because I think that this is really an important piece, especially for legislators to, to communicate with their constituents. So how do we address lack of transparency or the lack of understanding, because government and policy can be very confusing to, just the lay person or regular people. And so if you have any ideas on, how we can be more transparent, especially you as legislators, and how you can work with your constituents to help them understand the process better.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon us and our capacities to be transparent. And personally, I've done town halls, Facebook Lives. I've sent regular email updates throughout the legislative sessions to communicate with constituents about the different nuances when it comes to state government versus the local government. And so it's up to us as voters to seek out those folks who are willing to be accessible and to be transparent with the constituents, not just when there's an election coming up, but consistently throughout their tenure, because we can do a lot on our part in order to help educate folks when it comes to these differences and what resources are helpful. And then I'll bring this back full circle, but I think if we had Generation Citizen and more schools throughout the state of Oklahoma from an early age, getting young people to understand why it's so critical for them to do research when it comes to local and state affairs, I think long term that can help.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Representative Pay. I think it's important that we're always encouraging back and forth communication. And, again, I'll go full circle and say that the squeaky wheel gets that grease, right? That it's important for us to hear from you and for us to get that encouragement, I'll say, from you, that you want that transparency and that you're open to it. And I think a lot of times, and I think Erica made this point that in the chat, that it's once the election time is here, it's kind of too late for those things, and that we need to be constantly engaged, like Representative Pace said, and encouraging that, letting people know that that you want to hear from us. I think oftentimes we get wrapped up in the things we're doing and we're like, yeah, well, that's kind of in the weeds. People probably don't want to know that, but people actually do. And it's up to we can put the information out there, and if they don't want to engage with it in that moment, that's fine. But always being open, always reminding people, and even if we have to say it until we're blue in the face, that we are here for you, we're open to you, we work for you, and really value that input and communication with you. That's really the key.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here and for being accessible as legislators, and for being willing to have these conversations with not only your constituents, but with young people and administrators across the state as well. So I don't know if you have other things to do, but we welcome you to stay on or to pop back in and join us. Feel free to do some stuff in the chat, answer questions from your perspective as legislators. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks, everyone.